Kaya, and welcome everybody. Look, thank you so much for the organisers allowing me to speak here. And what I'm so impressed is that there's such a large number of Raine participants here and their families. I wouldn't mind a show of hands, if that's all right. Look at that. That's absolutely fantastic. I too would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, pay my respects to those elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to take you on a little journey. We'll talk about why we do the work we're doing today and why you all have been absolutely key in allowing us to do that as participants, and comparing some of the Raine and what we see up at Joondalup Health Campus in terms of data on some of the families going through there. Something about the Origins project, and let's see how we can join up together to create some amazing piece of research that would, very quickly take us on the world stage. I mean, I have to say Raine is already there, but I think to maintain that, we certainly need to join forces. So I'm really excited about this. So we know that there's not just COVID pandemic. The global pandemic of non-communicable diseases has been going on for a long time. And we know that a significant portion of this is actually pre-programmed early in life. And in every organ system, I mean, we all know people who've got these various conditions that we're seeing today. And we really need to understand what that pre-programming is and how we can make a change. So if I take you through a very brief example, looking at this, you can see that things like food allergies, eczema, I mean, to have 25% of children having eczema by 1 year of age means there's something going on earlier, and something is happening probably there early in the womb and in that early life, and we need to understand what that is. People have that genetic vulnerability to some of these diseases, but then you have to have that environmental impact, and what is it that switches the gene on? So that's called epigenetics, and that's a really exciting field that we're keen to be involved in. The other concept is obviously the microbiome. We hear quite a lot about the microbiome, and we certainly know that we're a mass of, we're over 90% of bacterial genes and only 10% of human genes, which means that we're constantly evolving and changing. I remember at medical school being told that, well, the genes you've got is what you've got, but that's completely wrong because they change continuously. And certainly how we're born, what babies eat, the antibiotics we consume, all these things can impact on your microbiome. And we know that our microbiome is so important for the immune system and brain development. Similarly, John Newnham, all his work that he's done in this field is incredible, but that inflammation that happens early in pregnancy or in pregnancy is something that also can impact on this epigenetic phenomenon that we're talking about. And there's simple things like, what can cause inflammation? Less time outside, more stress, the modern pollutants that we're exposed to, and the different foods we eat as well, and the different microbial diversities, the different microbes that we're exposed to. So they can all impact on a pregnancy and cause inflammation, which then may have an effect on that fetus and the child that we see, or the children that we see today, our future, I should say. The other really interesting thing is that transgenerational effect. My grandmother did in pregnancy, I was there as an egg inside her. And I don't want to ever blame my grandmother. I think she's done a fabulous job. But the point is that that intergenerational effect is really also very powerful, and we need to work and understand that better. So the major studies that we can see, and yes, we are the baby study there. So we've got Bustleton that started in 1966. And they've got over 30,000 participants and, over 1 million biosamples. We've got the Raine study, and thanks to you all, that you've got, over 10,000 participants and 170, lots of biosamples. And similarly with Origins, we've gone for 5 years now, and we've got over 15,000 participants and lots of biosamples. So there's a huge, there's a wealth of information just with these 3 studies in Western Australia to do some incredible work. in the future. So if we just compare the Raine and actually our Joondalup Health Campus population, so that's looking at 30 years. What's happened in 30 years? I think you probably all would guess what's happening. So the average age of having a baby has increased, both in the mother and the father, and then the BMI, the weight of the mothers and fathers have increased, mental health, gestational diabetes, thyroid disease, they've all increased, but there's low substance use. So I think if we just look at this in a sort of more pictorial form, you can see the green being the healthy weight, and you can see that significantly reduced in the Joondalup Health Campus group in both the mothers and the fathers over time. We're finding now that over 70% of our dads are either overweight or obese at the time of their child. Just before their child's born. Similarly, we can see there's been the health messages in terms of tobacco and alcohol and drugs has resulted in a dramatic reduction in these during pregnancy, which is absolutely fantastic. But what we've seen, which is sort of so worrying, and we can see that all today, we all know someone, and there'll be a lot of us in this room as well, with various issues in terms of mental health illness, and that's gone up tenfold. It's dramatic, that change. Some of it is recognising it, but it's gone up, hugely. And of course, thyroid disease, gestational diabetes, they've all increased. So in terms of the Origins project, we really focus. It's a community project. With a global vision, and we are funded by Paul Ramsay Foundation, the Australian government. I'm very thankful for that via Telethon 7. We're a collaboration between Telethon Kids and the Joondalup Health Campus. So what we do there is we see our mums twice in pregnancy, and we take lots of samples and questionnaires on them, and then at birth, and then we follow them up, and we see them at 1, 3, and 5 years of age. So we just started the 5-year checks on these gorgeous kids. They've got full of character. So we take anything we can find, get our hands on. And part of it, the interesting thing is that you don't realise how important some of these things are, because technology is changing. And I just was over East yesterday, and we were talking about microplastics, and I'll mention that briefly. But even the hair of a baby, they can depict some of the plastics or some of the products that are in there during pregnancy, and also the stress that child could have had during pregnancy. So it's incredible. Not that parents would like us to cut little babies' hair, but some of them come out quite bushy, so they might allow us to have a little bit there. There's obviously lots of questionnaires that we use, and we're particularly focusing on food, stress, exercise, being outdoors. I'm particularly a great fan of nature. Electronic use as well. So things like that probably weren't necessarily a major issue with the Raine study. So that's why it's so important for us to be able to compare things. So if we look at a snapshot in the last sort of 5 years, we've got over 16,000 participants and 7,300 babies born and over 6,500 mums. The interesting thing about what we've done with Origins is we've created this platform, and we're running lots of projects within the platform. So we've done about 40 projects, and I just want to share with you a few of them, just to give you a sense of what that's on. But in terms of when we follow up, say, the 1-year checks, and I do some of them as well, 50% of children, there's some concern. And I have to point out that our socioeconomic group in the Origin study is a little bit higher than probably the Raine study. And yet there are so many kids that have got issues around that 1-year mark, and 15% of them we've redirected for early intervention. There's a huge problem with iron levels, and we find that at 3 years of age, 10% have got extremely low iron, and around 50% have got low iron. And we know that iron is really important for every aspect of your development and growth and immune system. So if we look at this platform that's built these different projects, just giving you an example, we've essentially tried to look at what projects can help with reducing allergies, reducing obesity, looking at child development and managing screen time. So if I give you start off with something called Early Moves, some of you all might have heard about this, but Early Moves essentially, babies have these lovely movements, and we look at them and go, oh, that's beautiful. But in actual fact, it's actually, the movements are a window into that child's brain, which is incredible. So at 4 months of age, babies all have this little sort of twitching movement, and if they don't have that, there's a 95% chance of them having cerebral palsy. So it's incredible to be able to look at a movement and actually be able to identify what could be going on in their brain. Similarly, what researchers have found, that there are some movements that are happening at 2 weeks of age, as early as 2 weeks of age, 2 to 4 weeks of age, that identify children that might have a risk of a issue with their cognition, which is a risk of lower IQ. So that's very interesting, and we want to look at that in much more detail, because we know that there are sort of like 1 million neuronal connections happening every second. So there's a huge amount you can do in those early years while the brain is just forming this absolutely massive network. So we're going to be looking at developing machine learning tools to identify babies with potential learning problems and then provide them with that very early intervention. And if this study does work, there's potential to lift an IQ of a nation, which is a pretty, I never thought that would happen. So that's one of them. The other one, we've got a whole range of allergy studies. We know that it's very common, various allergies and eczema, but this particular study called Silva is giving mums prebiotics in pregnancy. So prebiotics is the fiber that the probiotics, the bacteria, love, and that's what they eat. So all it is we're giving high fiber to these mums in pregnancy and right until 6 months of age while they're breastfeeding. And then looking at the outcomes of allergies. In animals, in mice studies, it's been shown that it's actually really, it does reduce allergies. So we want to sort of show what it's like in human studies. And if that is the case, I think it's a really cheap, really good intervention to look at how we can reduce allergies happening in the future. The Thames water study is a really cool study. I don't know whether all of you would agree with me, but I've got used to the Perth water, but most people who come from eastern states kind of go, oh my gosh, it's really chlorinated. And I guess if you have highly chlorinated water, it's almost like consuming a low-dose antibiotic, and it changes your microbiome. So this particular study, again, randomized controlled, even the previous study on high fiber was randomized controlled, so you don't know who's getting what. But this particular one, they put water filters in and they extract out the chlorine, and we're looking at the gut microbiome. Unfortunately, next time we'll have more results on all these, but these are all, we've finished recruiting and we're analysing results. We've got some work on respiratory illness, so again, a range of things where they take a scraping of your nasal mucosa, and what the prediction is that if you have vulnerable nasal mucosa, does that then mean that you've got to be managed differently in your life because you're more likely to get certain types of respiratory diseases? So I think that's what we call precision medicine, where you actually then develop a way of early on working out what people need. Because at the moment, the asthma management plan, for example, everyone does the same thing, and we're all very different. So I think we need something more individually targeted. We've got dads, extremely important, and really looking at them in much more detail in terms of their cardiovascular and mental health risks. We've also got other studies it's like all of you all being here. If we send out a questionnaire to all our participants, we do get quite a good response rate. So certainly asking them about COVID-19 and doing some work in that space is important. And what we'd like to do is, with COVID's not going to go away, or the long COVID, is a problem for some people. And I think us joining together with Raine, so that we'd have so much more data, and Busselton as well, that's a really excellent area to work on. Screens, we're all interested to know what screens are doing for our children, for us as well. I'm completely addicted to mine, unfortunately, but it is a little bit of a problem, and we're certainly looking at things like child development, mental health measures. Does screen time mean you're replacing your time out in nature? Posture, obesity, eye tracking, even myopia, because you're meant to be looking at distance, and if you're constantly looking close by, you can increase your levels of myopia. So we'll do some work with the Lions Eye Institute on that. So it goes on, Mediterranean diet is interesting. We're looking quite closely at, if a mum has a high Mediterranean diet versus a low, does that affect the baby? So there's a picture there is actually the body composition. It's called a pea pod that we pop these babies into, and we measure their body composition, and then we can use the bod pod later on to look at that and the impact of the Mediterranean diet. We have shown that there is a lower fat composition in the babies born, but does that then pre-program them to kind of stay on that trajectory? That's something that we're going to look at. Nature, as I said, I love being out there in nature, getting a bit of mud on us and all those lovely the microbes out in nature. So we've just finished a preschool intervention looking at nature connectedness, environmental stewardship and healthy eating. And that's in the 3-year-olds, which is lovely. And that's with Nature Play WA. And I guess I alluded to this, which was the microplastic. It's called the Planet Project. But the biggest criticism is that most of the samples that are collected in plastic. So is that actually leaching out in our, the reports so far around the world in terms of microplastic research? Probably, can be criticised as having some contamination. So we're trying to take some samples, with absolute precision so that we don't try and not touch plastic at all. And then they're analysed over in Queensland. I just went over there, which was a very interesting. Andrew Forrest put a lot of money in to build this research submarine, which is essentially, there's no plastic in there, and it's all metal. So it's very, it's like going into one of those, industrial kitchens actually, all metal. But it's very interesting trying to do some really good research in that area. I just want to make sure. Look at my time. I don't like to ever go over time. And one of the other interesting. So you look at meconium, for example. So you think, okay, so meconium, there's that black stuff that babies, open their bowels in the first 48 hours, and it's absolutely sticky and horrible. But in actual fact, at 10 weeks of age, the meconium first gets laid down. So it doesn't go anywhere. It's laid down, and then the next lot comes up. So really, what you could look at, if you looked at the whole 24 hours of meconium, the first lot probably would provide you exposures in pregnancy in the first trimester, and then maybe the rest in the next trimester. So there is certainly something in there that's really important, and we're certainly collecting. We've just started doing this study where we're just collecting all the meconium, actually labelling it to look at those differences. We like to engage with everybody. We're very engaged with Raine and Bustleton, but certainly anyone can collaborate. I think that's the important thing, is to make sure that there are no silos, that we all work together. And I think on that note, I think it's important to then start talking about, why cohorts are so important. I mean, they compare similar data across different sites because things might be a bit different elsewhere. They can track and monitor, exposure of a certain thing, like, for example, microplastics. We can track, or nanoplastics. We might be able to look at what happens in the Raine study, because there was much less plastic around then compared to what we've got now. Provide a good, strong community voice, because I think that's the important thing. You're the ones that are going to help us make a change, because it's your data. It's what's happened to you in your story. Providing that real-time feedback, I think, is really important, because it actually can pick up certain conditions and manage things early and provide kids into early intervention. It enables a platform like I've just shown you with all these intervention research or observational research studies. So it gives you an opportunity to use the people within the cohort to look at various studies of interest. Certainly, you can drive translation and policy in real time. We have certainly local and global collaboration, and we would argue that every community does need a cohort. So if I briefly talked about the international cohorts around, so the US have got this amazing cohort called ECHO, which a lot of policy is driven through that. But what they've done is they've actually had 83 existing cohorts that they've just joined together. Okay, so I think the power is actually it doesn't matter if you've got smaller cohorts. I think the important thing is to sort of bring them together and then look at and harmonise them where you can. When we started Origins, we actually looked at all the questionnaires that Raine were asked, that you all were asked, and your parents were asked, and we actually then tried to do the same thing so that we can actually compare this. So in Norway, there's another huge cohort called MOBA, where there's about over 100,000 children in that, and they use that in so many different ways. To, as I said, to drive policy and research. Born in Bradford is a community study in the UK where they've been given money by the UK government, and they haven't got much money, but they have given them a lot of money to evaluate programs and policy. So most things will go through that. There's a big cohort in Japan of over 100,000 babies, and in Australia we've got lots of cohorts, but what we want is to actually join forces, and if we can start in WA, then that'll be a fabulous start, because we've got incredible information just here that's happening here. So really having the Raine, Origins and Bustleton, I think, together is a no-brainer, I would say, and it would enable a large biobank and data repository of information to ask some really important questions that we're all concerned, and I think the community needs to be asking those questions as well. We've got already over 55,000 participants, but this would increase, because if you're looking at grandparents and children and all that, you'll be increasing up to over 100,000. So we'd already have an incredible resource that has cost a lot to get to this stage, and it's just a matter of making sure we keep it and use it the right way. We can create a platform for cutting-edge research and discovery, and certainly that's, again, what I talked about, why cohort's important: monitoring disease and exposure, evaluating programs, running these little nested studies in, and making sure that you all are the community voice. We're particularly interested in those protective factors. You all know about those sort of risk factors, but the protective ones, like, for example, being out in nature, physical activity, sleep, healthy food choices. So using a large cohort to better understand how we reduce stress and inflammation and improve mental health and resilience is really important. So the one thing that's missing in all these is that we probably, the underrepresented communities really are missing, and I think it'll be really important to see if we can actually try and get a cohort started in using some of the underrepresented communities. So this is my last slide, and really it's really about cradle to grave, and it's the WA cohorts. Our future is actually together, and I can't thank the collaborations that we have with Raine, and actually again congratulate the participants, because it's because of you all that we can keep this going. Otherwise we wouldn't actually have any of this information, any of this data, and all this phenomenal research that's come out of Raine, and I can see out of Bustleton as well, and what's coming out of the Origin study. So thank you so much for listening.